Welcome to Pocket Pulp. I'm your host, Eric Brian Moore. This week, I'm excited to present Reclaiming the Moon by Michael Hiebert. Michael is the award-winning author of many books and short stories. He's the author of Dream with Little Angels, the first book of his acclaimed Alvin, Alabama mystery series. His most recent work is The Rose Garden Arena Incident, a serial thriller in 7 parts, all of which you can find on Amazon and on Audible. I first met Michael on the website Writers Village University, where I took a writing class from him. And the first book of his that I read was actually a book on writing called Journeys Under the Moon, which is all about the hero's journey and different character archetypes. From there, we struck up a friendship, and I've had the privilege of recording several of his stories, some of which you can find on Audible. If you like what we're doing here at Pocket Pulp, please rate, review, subscribe, and definitely share. And now, Reclaiming the Moon, written by Michael Hiebert, read by Eric Brian Moore. Other than the bumper sticker, the plasma television looked new. It needed a good wipe with a Windex, but it had to be less than a year old and worth a good chunk of change. Caroline wanted one, and lately priced similar models for $3,000. She'd never stick a bumper sticker to hers. It ain't paranoia if your phone's really tapped, Mr. Nixon. Angled along the top, it partially obscured a corner of the screen where CNN had ran muted since she sat down. That was, she checked her watch, 26 minutes ago? Since then, Vince Kemper hadn't stopped talking, and not just talking, crazy, psychotic talking. Do you have any idea why fluoride's in our water? Caroline shrugged. It's good for teeth? Actually, it's not. Only children's teeth, like under 10. Otherwise, all 5 dentists would recommend it. Anyway, check the warning about not swallowing on your toothpaste tube. Seriously. It's carcinogenic, yet it's purposely put in our tap water. Ever wonder why? Not before today. Didn't matter. Vince rarely left room to talk. Otherwise, she'd ask why he'd framed an enlargement of the dollar bill pyramid and hung it over his fireplace. 2 reasons. First, it calms people. Crowd control. Big Brother 1984. Second, and most importantly, it's a byproduct of aluminum production. In the 50s, aluminum plants suddenly had piles of waste to get rid of. Guess where it went? The water? Exactly. The sofa's black leather sighed as Vince sat back, arms crossed. Bookcases stood along 2 walls, stuffed with an extraordinarily high number of books containing the word Freemason on the spine. So, you're a conspiracy theorist? Vince scoffed. No, I'm enlightened. Theorist, i.e. theory, denotes possible error. How many people even know about WTC-7, you think? What's WTC-7? Exactly, see? WTC-7 was the 3rd building that fell during 9/11, like hours later. No planes hit it, it just imploded. She shook her head, unable to believe she hadn't left yet. Vince misinterpreted. Exactly. What the hell, right? Everyone should be talking about that, but nobody does. Nobody wants to confront the ugliness, so they ignore it, like the bullet that shot JFK 3 times. Snatching his Coke from the coffee table, he snorted a laugh. Maybe that's what took out WTC-7, huh? Oswald's magic bullet. Vince Kemper talked so fast, his voice distorted time. Minutes stretched to hours. She'd been here at least 2 hours, not the 26 minutes her watch reported. Scratch that, 28 minutes. Jesus, how could only 2 minutes have passed since she checked? It's like those guys who discovered cold fusion. Imagine never refilling your car, just driving forever on a chunk of deuterium in water. Oil, the blood of America's economy, was about to become worthless. Those guys at least realized they were in danger. They thought faxing their discovery all over the globe would protect them. He wiped his mouth. But they underestimated, he formed air quotations, the machine. Remember what happened to them? Actually, Caroline shifted uncomfortably. I've never heard this before. Exactly. Nobody has. Everyone involved just, he snapped his fingers, poof! And as usual, the public conveniently forgot about them. Ignorance keeps life simple. Caroline had hoped to go somewhere fancy tonight. Maybe that new restaurant Wei Jiang. She even wore her sexy new dress, black, strapless, and sparkly, reminding her of the night sky. They both worked at StarTech, Caroline in accounting, Vince in something to do with computers. She had the advantage of knowing his salary. He could afford somewhere nice. This afternoon, after asking him out, she tried explaining this to Phyllis and Danny. He's cute, in a nerdy vampire sort of way. They thought she'd lost her marbles. Why's his skin so white? Danny asked. Maybe an iron deficiency, Phyllis offered. Or lack of sunlight. He never leaves that computer. He's creepy, not cute, Danny said. They had laughed, but now Caroline wished she'd listened. Although Vince's house was quite nice, a faint smell of dirty feet hung throughout, making her slightly queasy. Telling herself it was expensive cheese didn't help. She hoped they'd be heading for dinner soon, but Vince just slurped Coke, watching silent CNN and pontificated insanity. Maybe he planned on ordering pizza. She cleared her throat. I guess you believe in Roswell? Aliens in the White House? Rolling his eyes, he pretended to gag. The U.S. military built the Roswell saucer. That's why it crashed. It was one of many designs they stole from Tesla. Christ, they couldn't wait for him to kick off so they could boot down that hotel door and grab those notebooks. Look at Project HARP. They wouldn't even acknowledge its existence until citizens started coming back from Alaska with pictures of the site. They still insist it's not a military operation, yet every official site is hosted on DoD servers. Think about that. What's HARP? Ionic heating. Moving energy cheaply through the ionosphere. Tesla invented it 100 years ago. They called him crazy, but they knew and waited to get their paws on all that power. Now they have it. HARP can transfer oil from Alaska, control weather, and be targeted to blow any area on the planet to smithereens. Caroline turned over her wrist. 30 minutes. This was crazy. And White House aliens is just dumb. Face it, any extraterrestrials visiting our planet would be so advanced we'd have nothing to offer. Besides, all UFO theories have the same problem. What's that? Vince leaned forward. There is no intelligent life up there. Really? This surprised Caroline. With all those stars? Listen, first there's SETI, not even a peep since Carl Sagan set it up, but then SETI's got an inherent problem, so that proves nothing. Caroline's lips parted, but Vince answered before she could ask. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, its basic assumption that any intelligent transmissions will be non-random, is flawed. Nobody considered bandwidth issues. Nowadays, for efficiency, we compress information, and guess what? Fully compressed data's random. The type of old-fashioned radio transmission SETI expects barely survived 100 years for humans. I'm betting things on Beetlejuice aren't much different. You think there's... No, that was a joke. I told you, there are no ETs. The real proof comes from nanotech. We are so close to creating nanites, tiny machines that, among other things, self-replicate. One day, we'll send them exploring into space. We won't need many because they'll make more as they go, and those will make more, and those ad infinitum, accelerating in number exponentially. 31 minutes. Christ. So they'll be everywhere. They'll fill space. Now, remember, mankind's been around maybe 15,000 years, a teensy fraction of the 15 billion since the Big Bang. Elsewhere, life could spring up any time, with odds strongly favoring the 99.9% preceding us. Ipso facto, any alien society's almost certainly much older than ours, which means they reached nanotechnology millions, maybe billions of years ago. Their nanites should be everywhere. Yet, he spread his hands. They're not exactly. On the television, CNN continued. The marquee scrolling across the bottom announced 25,000 slain in Sudan. Vince grabbed the remote and the cordless phone off the coffee table at once. Jesus! Again, he surprised her by his reaction to the brutality. But as he raised the volume, she realized his interest had been caught by the top headline. NASA special to debunk moon landing doubters. A photocopy of a photograph Caroline vaguely remembered seeing before hung by a pushpin above the television. In black marker, someone had written across it, "Think, how do you make a footprint in silt without water?" Exclamation point. Caroline decided the date was over as Vince dialed the phone. "Dude, are you watching this? What the hell?" CNN explained that during an upcoming repositioning, the Hubble telescope would cross the moon, offering views of the old landing sites. They planned to broadcast live pictures of all the crap the astronauts left behind. "Dude, how the hell will they pull this off?" Before "Dude" answered, Caroline's feet were back inside her black strappy pumps and headed downstairs toward the door she entered 32 minutes ago. Make that 33. NASA astronaut candidate Logan Hart didn't want to be here. He sat patiently in the CNN newsroom opposite anchorman Keith Carson, answering questions and doing his best to provide color commentary for a trivial reorientation of the HST. 8 NASA employees were offered the opportunity. Nobody wanted it, and Hart drew short straw. Somebody in PR got word that the repointing of the telescope could cross the moon and spun the transient event into a spectacle worthy of public attention. NASA rarely turned down opportunities to dazzle taxpayers, especially when they involved the Hubble Space Telescope. The marketing project was green-lighted. Calls were made, CNN got the exclusive, and Hart flew out to Atlanta yesterday. A painstaking half-hour ago, cameras went live for the 90-minute Did We Really Go to the Moon special. So far, he'd answered call-ins from a dozen conspiracy lunatics and endured Keith Carson's seemingly endless supply of inane observations. Carson's hair took obvious priority over research. They came back from commercial. Carson's fluorescent smile glowed at the camera as he brought viewers back up to speed. Before the show started, the director emphasized that Hart should look at either the camera or Carson and not the studio monitors. But sitting and waiting under the hot studio lights, he kept catching himself doing just that. Probably because of the warning. A second monitor displayed the feed from Goddard, currently just a black screen. "Tell me, why now?" Carson asked Hart. "Why has NASA taken this long to point Hubble at the moon?" This question further underscored Carson's lack of research. It irritated Hart, but outwardly he retained complete professionalism. Each answer he gave with quiet calmness, his voice slightly spiced with traces of a youth spent in San Antonio. "The HST has actually scanned the lunar surface a number of times, just not in such a public forum. Normally, though, an avoidance procedure is practiced. Nearby objects like the Earth and Moon are so bright they can damage the equipment. When we do wish to analyze them, the FGS's, the fine guidance sensors, are shut down. They're extremely light-sensitive. By far, the HST's greatest contributions to astronomy have come from deep space observations. That's what it was designed for. For instance, by studying Hubble shots of distant supernovae, astronomers found evidence suggesting the universe rate of expansion is accelerating." Carson nodded. Hart detected no hint of understanding in his eyes. "Logan, do you really think tonight will end speculation that the moon landings never happened? That it was all some kind of government conspiracy?" Hart chuckled. "I don't know, Keith. On every bell curve, you're always going to have the short tails on either side, the fringe. Some people just seem to love a good conspiracy theory. If they think we faked the Apollo missions, they'll probably think we're faking this too." "Good point." Carson looked at the HST feed. "I think something's coming up on the monitors." Hart was relieved. He could actually look now. Sure enough, the left side was a bright wash of white bleeding into the black of space. A minute later, the picture updated. The white, now a third of the screen, began coming into focus. "Just for the record," Carson said, "this is live footage, right?" Hoping it didn't sound forced, Hart laughed again. "Very much so, Keith. As live as possible, at least. There's some delay as the HST data bounces through satellite to the TDRSS ground station before feeding across to the Goddard Flight Center in Maryland, where Goddard's computers decode it. Then, it's straight over to us." He didn't mention that process usually took a day. Tonight, it was closer to an hour. Since accuracy wasn't important for the show, Goddard wrote special imaging software that averaged frames on the fly using pixel clusters. The image still looked good. The moon now filled the monitor, detailed enough to see crater lines. The camera cut to Carson. "What should we be looking for, Logan? Buzz Aldrin's golf balls, American flags, footprints?" Hart couldn't let that one go by. "Actually, Alan Shepard from Apollo 14 was our golfer." He smiled. "But golf balls are probably too small, even for these highly detailed images. Hubble's telemetry will cut a nearly straight latitudinal sweep, providing a wide-angled view of 4 of the 6 Apollo landing sites. Soon, we'll see the edge of the Mares Tranquilatas Basin, where Apollo 11 made history. We should have a great view of the ascent and descent rocket stages for the LM Neil Armstrong left to step onto the lunar surface from on July 20th, 1969. Carson looked disappointed about the golf balls. "For those viewers not science-savvy, can you describe that in layman's terms?" Hart patiently explained how the LM, the Lunar Landing Module, was similar to the craft launched from the Earth, only smaller. It required rocket stages that, for weight reasons, were jettisoned when no longer needed. "So there's more stuff up there than just moon buggies and golf balls?" "Lots more," Hart said. "It's estimated 200 tons of artificial objects are scattered across the surface, nearly all belonging to us or the Soviets." On the monitor, the HST image updated. "Looks like we're coming up on Mares Tranquilatas now. We'll see the LM descent stage any minute." The next update showed no sign of the Apollo 11 site, but they had to be damn close. Hart knew the moon as well as most places on Earth. In silence, they waited for the next update. Still nothing. Yet the area looked right. Anxious tension wound inside Hart's stomach. He felt the lights hot on his skin. Nervously, he smiled at Carson. "Next shot for sure." But still, no sign of Apollo 11. Just more gray lunar ground. A knot formed inside Hart on the next update. There was no mistaking the landscape. They were looking at the right place. The debris just wasn't there. Something was wrong. Sweat trickled from his short-cropped hair, weaving a path down to his square chin. "Wait," Carson said. "There's something. Looks like a shadow. Is that what we're looking for?" Hart hesitated. "No, that looks like artifacting introduced by the decoding software. Sometimes—" The monitor updated. Hart stopped talking. Carson was too excited to notice. "No offense, Logan, but this certainly looks different than you described it. To me, it almost looks like ancient ruins or something. The Roman Colosseum, maybe. Fascinating." Hart couldn't answer. Carson described it perfectly. They weren't looking at an LM rocket stage, but something else, something very large. The next frame, Carson's commentary continued. "I suppose I don't understand what I'm seeing, but to me, that thing looks just like—" In his chest, Hart's heart nearly stopped. The same thought burst into his mind long before Carson finished his sentence. "A pyramid. We're looking at a goddamn pyramid." 2,700 miles northwest, Vince Kemper sat on his sofa in nearly the exact same place he had when Caroline wigged out and left after asking him out. Joel White, often just Dude to Vince, sat beside him. Computer hacker extraordinaire, 7 years or so ago, Joel worked for the enemy. He had some sort of top-secret DoD contract Vince knew very little about, and Joel refused to expunge any details of, even under umbrella drink sedation, claiming it was classified. He always insisted Vince would be disappointed anyway, that it wasn't all that interesting, but Vince suspected differently. Joel's refusal to commit treason pissed him off. Or maybe he was just jealous. Now Joel spun his wheels writing database software for a lame-ass web information company called Pyrotech.com. Lured by the promise of stock options, he'd been trapped into corporate comfort by a six-figure salary. The same fate befell Vince 2 years ago with Techstar. Sooner or later, though, Vince planned to show them all. It wasn't about the money. It had never been about the money. He'd run the film in his mind many times. He'd get up from his desk, walk through marketing and production and scream, "Fuck y'all, I'm going home," before walking out and slamming the door. Maybe he'd leave an email bomb set for 30 minutes later, sending his manifesto company-wide. That would show them it had never been about the money. Well, except for the time being. But right now, with their feet on the coffee table, a bowl of popcorn squeezed between them, Vince and Joel's attention was glued to CNN. Both gulped Cokes while listening to some NASA guy explain basic astronomy to Keith Carson, Mr. Cheese himself. An overlaid window displayed the feed from HST, currently just craters and cracks. "Dude," Vince asked for the 100th time, "how the hell are they gonna pull this off?" "Man, simple. CGI." "I suppose. Have to be damn good CGI." "Man, it's the government. Their shit probably makes DreamWorks look like Dr. Mario." Vince snorted, then raised a brow. "You know this? For a fact?" Joel sighed. "No, man, I told you. The shit I worked on makes my database job exciting." Narrowing his eyes, Vince analyzed his friend's face. If he was lying, he was one of the best damn liars Vince ever met. He took a big swig of Coke, followed by a drawn-out burp. Pointing to the HST image, Joel said, "That's likely real, but Goddard'll be composting CGI on top of it. That it's practically grayscale makes everything easier." The telescope progressed across the moon. The NASA guy announced they were approaching the Sea of Tranquility. Vince stuffed popcorn into his mouth. "Here we go." He washed it down with the rest of his Coke. While Joel reached into the popcorn, Vince fumbled for a new can of soda from the case on the floor beneath him without looking away from the television. Any time now, they'd see the LM stages, the NASA guy said. But he started fumbling after 3 more frames of gray ground went by. Joel laughed, spitting popcorn. "Holy shit! Their CGI isn't working! Look, he's sweating! Since when do astronauts sweat? Oh, God! This is great!" The leathers squeaked as they shifted excitedly, both shoving more popcorn into their mouths. On the next frame, Vince popped his soda and froze. Joel stopped chewing, his hand pausing halfway to the popcorn. They watched 10 more impossible frames before CNN went to a test pattern. "Holy shit," Vince whispered. On the table beside his feet, Joel's cellular burst to life. Logan Hart never made it back to Washington as fast as that evening. A minute after CNN realized they lost their signal, his cellular phone had rung, telling him a car was on its way. The feed from Goddard lasted about 10 seconds longer than CNN. A numbness fell over him as he was driven to a government airfield and put on a plane. Questions orbited his brain. What the hell was going on? What was that he had seen? Part of him didn't believe any of it. Likely it would all turn out to be a decoding glitch. After all, they had thrown the custom software together for the show very quickly. Except, if that were the case, why was he on a private government jet being flown to Washington? Surely someone else suspected the software. If they hadn't, they would by the time he landed. But barely an hour later, when he touched down, Another car was waiting with its engine actually running to take him to NASA. Never had Hart's composure been put to this extreme a test. He felt discombobulated. He wasn't used to it. He didn't like it. Now he sat in an expansive NASA boardroom on the top floor of the main complex with 6 other people. At one end of the table, a television silently ran repeated viewings of the HST moon sequences. Seated across from him was strategic planning engineer Sam Kensington and mission commander Kelly Adams. They were part of his team, and Hart knew them well. In many ways, Kelly was responsible for Hart's astronaut candidacy. NASA Administrator Warren Thomas sat near the door. Hart had spoken to the administrator only once, when Thomas approached him at last year's Christmas party, congratulating him on his promotion to active duty. The other 3, Hart had never met before in his life. One, a young, skinny kid with dirty blonde, curly hair and wire-frame glasses, obviously was important. His late arrival held up their meeting nearly 2 hours. Introduced as Joel White, he wore a checkered shirt over a white T-shirt. Judging by his age and stature, Hart guessed him a programmer. The second man was his opposite. He might have been 60, with little hair left to comb over his head and a good 40 pounds over his weight. Years of whiskey and cigarettes had tempered his voice. Hart didn't have a clue what role he might play. His name was Stone. Whether that was first or last, nobody said. The 6th person in attendance was the only one speaking now that the meeting had convened, and the minute he started, an uneasiness filled the room. A tall black man in a dark suit, Hart couldn't pin an age on him. His name was never given. They were simply told he came from Homeland Security. Leaning over the table opposite the television, the man's thick black fingers pressed onto the mahogany top. He spoke with a deep, commanding, almost threatening voice that filled the room. And he wanted to know what the fuck was on the moon, and who the hell decided to broadcast it to the entire country. Nobody had an answer. As Hart anticipated, everyone's first guess had been a software glitch. That was ruled out by running a raw frame through STSCI. Except for clarity, it came out identical. The details made whatever was up there loom even darker. They had reviewed the full transmission from HST several times before the meeting. During the entire reorientation, not a single expected object was sighted. Just that massive whatever it was that looked like a ruined pyramid. Sam Kensington, always too emotional, threw his hands open. "This is crazy. China, Germany, Britain, everyone's considering moonshots. There's no way this thing went unnoticed. It makes no sense. It's too big." Before anybody could respond, a quiet question was posed by Joel White, the kid sitting beside Hart. "Did we really go to the moon?" He shifted uncomfortably as he asked it, his eyes never leaving the tabletop in front of him. Hart and Kensington laughed, but both quickly stopped. What if they hadn't? Before today, Hart never questioned the Apollo missions, but now he reconsidered history, unrolling events in his mind. The late 60s were a desperate time for America. The Russians beat them into space. Vietnam beat them everywhere else. People were losing faith. The United States needed a success. Would they chance a failure if they didn't have to? Why not stage the whole thing? Why hadn't he considered this before? If it happened today, he would have at least entertained the possibility. But knowing slightly more than the average citizen about government policies always made you cynical. What if all this time the lunatic fringe were actually right? Outside the window, a crescent moon rose red over a velvet blanket of stars, hanging like a sickle, while the question tumbled through Hart's mind. "We went," Stone said. "We were there." A pocket of silence followed, interrupted by a digital melody. Calmly, the black man stood. Pulling a cellular from inside his jacket, he stepped outside into the hallway, returning a minute later. I don't give a shit whether we went before or not. I do know is, though, we're going now." That night, NASA astronaut candidate Logan Hart officially became NASA astronaut Logan Hart, commander of Uranus 1. Almost immediately after he announced the mission, the black man from the Pentagon had left the room with Administrator Thomas. The remaining group launched naturally into open discussion. Unlike the HST images, this was something they all understood. When they talked about going into space, there was no anxiety. They all knew their strengths and weaknesses. The discussion turned to debating the merits of a manned versus unmanned mission when Administrator Thomas returned alone nearly an hour later. He cleared his throat. The room fell silent. "It's a manned mission," he said quietly. "We launch in 14 days. In his peripheral vision, Hart saw Kelly Adams' mouth drop open. Sam Kensington's chair squeaked as he sat back and actually laughed. "Oh, that's impossible." "Impossible isn't an option." Stone breathed deep, put his hands behind his head, and leaned back in his chair. "Do they know what this'll take?" Thomas nodded. "We'll get anything we ask for. Unlimited budget." Swiveling her chair, Kelly turned to face the window. 2 weeks, she said quietly. "Who's our crew?" Thomas nodded to Hart. "He's your commander. You two pick the rest." Hart raised his eyebrows. It felt like Christmas all over again. The kid beside Hart shook his head. "You can't begin embedded systems programming until you at least have a prototype to embed. You'll literally have maybe a day or two to program and debug." Stone shifted in his chair. "He's right. I'll need a team of unprecedented size, maybe 30. "Then you'll get 30, and use emulators until hardware's available." Thomas clapped his hands. "This is all government classified top secret, people. Bring in whoever you need, but not one person more. Oh, and Ms. Adams?" He jerked Kelly's attention from the night sky. "This is a military operation. We will be armed." 14 days later, Operation Goodnight Moon commenced as Uranus 1 secretly launched from Cape Canaveral under cover of darkness. The launch went perfectly, putting Hart and his 6-person crew on final lunar orbital insertion burn barely 2 days later. To make deadline, engineering built much of the spacecraft from salvaged parts proven on past missions, dating back even to Apollo. The computers and internal systems, however, were all cutting edge, leaving little need for course corrections or updates from Houston. Uranus's crew just did them on board. The lunar surface hung outside the hatch window, one half in shadow, the other half bathed in earthshine. They didn't need help from home, yet. "Uranus 1, Houston. 1 minute to LOS. LOI BSQ-1 looks good to us. Go when ready." "Roger, Houston." Hart glanced at pilot Dale Michaels. "Commence LOI on my mark." Michaels readied the central workstation, pausing with his index finger hovering over Enter. "Mark." The spacecraft rumbled. "Houston, Uranus, we're on final burn." "Copy that, Uranus. See you on the other side." The craft shook as it accelerated like a pendulum and swung behind the moon. A blanket of shadow blotted out the earth. The radio fizzled dead. Loss of signal. With no visual or radio contact with home, it felt like somebody cut their umbilical cord. A hollow emptiness tiptoed through the darkness, leaving Logan Hart feeling strangely abandoned, left alone to confront that thing below. For the first time, he felt scared. Over the 2 weeks they prepared for the mission, the HST continued monitoring the object. It changed noticeably, almost on a daily basis. Now it looked closer to an intact pyramid than one in ruins. Whatever built it was doing so at an amazing pace. When the spacecraft made it back front side, its orbit was perfect. Houston agreed, and little else was said over the radio or even in the cabin. They were all waiting for the same thing. "Uranus 1, this is Houston. We show you coming up on target now." please retain radio contact and comment on visuals. Roger, Houston. Hart and the rest of his crew watched the hatch window. He could feel the tension rising as they began going over Mare Tranquillatus. Silently, he counted down. EVA Capcom Sarah York gasped. Hart reported. Houston, target in sight. Looks as expected. From here, indiscernible from an Egyptian-style pyramid, only bigger. Structure nearly complete. Hart didn't add that he felt it watching them. We copy, Oranos. God damn it, whispered Elizabeth Taggart. On the next revolution around the moon, the LM ejected from Oranos, piloted by Taggart. She'd be the first woman on the moon, but few people would ever know. Hart and Sarah York made up the remaining landing crew. Every kilometer they dropped, the sense of being watched grew. After a quiet and uneventful touchdown a mile from target, they spent an hour in the LM waiting for any sort of reaction. There wasn't one, although Houston confirmed the pyramid's rate of construction continued exponentially. They don't know we're here, Sarah whispered. Hart grabbed his rifle. Or we don't pose enough threat to worry about. The rifles were specially designed for this operation. Designated in the mission plan as Tactical 1, each LM crew member had one. Then there were the detonators for the nuclear device housed in the LM's floor. All 7 of the Oranos' crew had one of them. Activating the bomb required 3 separate detonation signals. The LM bomb was Tactical 2. There was a third. Orbiting above Hart's head, Oranos carried a payload of 6 auto-targeting missiles, each equipped with a 20-megaton Valkyrie Mark V nuclear warhead. The Pentagon installed the onboard weapons system that handled launching and targeting. NASA was given no technical specifications other than functionality details. Like the LM bomb, 3 signals were required to launch the Valkyries. Once a sequence was initiated, the missiles acted autonomously. If Oranos was out of target range, launch would occur at the next available window. The environment system monitoring vitals interfaced with the weapon system. If all 3 LM astronauts died, or less than 3 members of Oranos' crew were left alive, missile launch initiated automatically. Once initiated, only the Pentagon could abort Tactical 3. None of this eased the tension in Hart's chest. He nodded to the 3 EVA suits hanging outside the airlock. Let's go. Lizzie, pop the doors. Meanwhile, on Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, 3 miles northwest of Chichen Itza, Allison Chung worked a dig with 6 students. She picked the site mainly as a teaching tool, not because she expected to make any great discoveries. Chung's real interest lay continents away. The Pyramid of Khufu in Egypt's Gizeh necropolis. Considered the foremost expert on the Great Pyramid and its hieroglyphs, Chung devoted the last 15 years of her life to studying its secrets. So far, the endeavor unearthed more questions than answers, mainly about the construction. Egypt's other pyramids, built to house the royal bodies of pharaohs and their treasure, seemed based upon this first. Yet they held none of the same mystery. The Great Pyramid contained no body, no treasure, not of the material kind anyway, but of the mysterious kind it had plenty. 30 times larger than the Empire State Building, its chosen location was far from random. Few spots on Earth could support it. More amazing, the stones were perfectly cut to 1/100th of an inch, and it got weirder. Dividing half its circumference by twice its height gave you pi, accurate to 6 significant figures. The strangest thing of all, to Allison at least, wasn't discovered until the 20th century, when aircraft were able to fly over and take measurements. All 4 sides are slightly concave. Their curve duplicates the exact curvature of the Earth. An army of slaves managed all this 4,600 years ago. Whoever commanded them apparently knew a lot about the planet they lived on. Beside her, Denise Monroe, the only other woman on the site, stood, and wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. She wore a straw hat and a white shirt. At 5'2", she barely saw above the top of the dig. "Do you hear that?" Remaining squatted, Allison stopped scraping and tilted her head. Then she asked everyone else to stop. Yes, she did hear something. An engine. Unlike Denise, Allison cleared the hole's top by nearly a foot. A trickle of sweat managed to escape the blue bandana knotted tightly over her head as she stood and stared across the dry expanse of rocky hardpan and sage, a hand shielding her eyes from the hot desert sun. In the distance, a stream of dust kicked up behind whatever made the noise. "What is it?" Kurt Kenner asked. Allison ignored him and watched a jeep approach, weaving and bouncing, until it was close enough to make out the olive-drab color and the U.S. Army insignia on its hood. This can't be good. On the moon, the pyramid nearly filled the horizon, even though it was nearly a mile away. Cassiopeia twinkled like a jewel above its unfinished top. A wave of anxiety swept through Hart. His pulse quickened, a fact reported on his wrist display. Michael's voice crackled in his headset. "Everything okay down there?" "Roger, Dale. We're fine. A bit overwhelming, that's all." Although it originated within their suits, vitals on the wrist displays were downloaded from Uranus' environment system. This way the ground crew knew exactly what data the orbital crew and computers saw, adding an extra layer of security against malfunction. With a phalanx of warheads directly linked to this information, redundancy was important. "Think they're aware of us?" Sarah asked. Hart tried to keep his grip on his weapon loose. I think they don't care about us." Lizzie laughed nervously. "They'd care if they knew about our payload." Hart wasn't sure he agreed, especially as they closed in on the last quarter mile and he looked nearly straight up the structure's front. Jesus, it must be nearing the top of the atmosphere. A chill touched the base of his spine and scampered up. Centered at the pyramid's base was a black, rectangular hole. "Uranus, we've reached the target. Lizzie and Sarah will wait outside while I go in for a preliminary internal examination." Compared to the pyramid's front, which was impossible to see entirely this close, the entrance seemed tiny, even though Hart estimated it at 20 feet wide and probably twice that tall. Tightening his fingers on his weapon, he cautiously approached. "Copy that. Your pulse is up 20. Blood pressure rising." "No shit," Hart laughed, hoping nobody noticed his fear. Despite his sealed spacesuit, he could taste the moon's dry dust in his mouth. From here, the inside of the pyramid looked midnight black. "Here goes." Turning on his suit lamp, he stepped through the entrance. His breath caught in his throat. Lizzie's voice. "Commander, everything 5 by?" He swallowed. "Yeah, it's just incredible. I took my wife to Egypt a few years back. It's exactly the same." He began following the inside perimeter, running his gloved fingers along the hieroglyphs. "Except larger. Much larger." "Commander, Houston, do you feel safe enough to take pictures?" Hart made a quick sweep. "Yeah, I think so." He let the rifle hang from its strap and raised the camera, video scanning the wall. The data automatically uplinked to Uranus. "I'll take some high def of the hieroglyphs, Houston. Maybe get an expert down there to compare with the ones back home." "Way ahead of you, Commander. Already on our way." Hart continued walking, stopping at a pair of statues 3 times his height. His lamp reflected brightly off their surface. "Are those?" He stared up, squinting at their heads. "Holy." "Commander?" "Gold statues of cats," he said. "At least to me. Never been great at interpreting art, though. Sending video now." "Sorry, can you repeat?" Dale's question scrambled into static. "I said they look like cats." Another burst of static, Then Hart's radio died completely, followed by his camera. He started back for the door when movement caught his eye. Before him, his lamp betrayed a tiny shadow against the gold. He leaned forward, examining the creature clinging to the statue's side, and felt a weird déjà vu. Somewhere in Hart's brain, he recognized what it was, but couldn't pry the information loose. Until it moved again. My God. A flat tone filled his headset. Reluctantly, he pulled his attention away and checked his wrist. It showed confusing vitals. According to Uranus's environment system, he just died. Allison never flew in a private jet before, nor had she ever flown without knowing her destination. But the soldiers who picked her up in Mexico and the attendants on the flight simply answered everything with, "Sorry, ma'am, we're not authorized to discuss anything." Eventually, she found out. Now she was at the Pentagon, sitting in a small sealed room with a table, a door, and little else, sipping bad coffee and being shown video and pictures by a fully uniformed Army colonel called Dodery, who insisted it all came in an hour ago from a secret operation on the moon. She lifted the styrofoam cup to her lips, the aroma a welcome replacement to the hospital-like disinfectant smell of the room. "So, let me make sure I understand. You're saying aliens built this pyramid?"
"I'm not saying anything, Ms. Chung." He leaned over where she sat. "That's why we brought you in. You're the expert. We want to know what you make of it."
"Is everyone crazy today?"
"No more than usual."
She lifted an eyebrow, unable to tell if he was joking. "Well, these images aren't from the moon. They're from here. These hieroglyphics are Egyptian. None of these symbols are new. In fact, their arrangement is particularly archetypal and basic, like those found in the Great Pyramid. Everything points to Ra."
"Ra?"
"The king of gods, the sun god."
"I see."
"Colonel," she asked, sipping coffee, "are you going to tell me what's really going on?" He paused, but before he could speak, a younger officer knocked and opened the door. Irritated, the colonel looked up.
"Sorry, sir, we have a situation."
"What kind of situation?" Briefly, the officer regarded Allison.
"Concerning Goodnight Moon."
"Go ahead." The colonel stood. "She's cleared." "TAC 3's gone hot, sir. Contingency LMD 3. The colonel's gaze fell to the tabletop. Allison knew this was bad.
"They're all dead?" he asked.
"No, sir, that's the problem. Uranus claims visual confirmation of ground flares, at least 2 alive. Apparent environment system malfunction." A deep breath.
"Have we fired?"
"No, sir. Windows closed. 5 minutes to LOS. Uranus is requesting ground abort sequence." The colonel closed his eyes. Solemnly, he shook his head.
"There isn't one, Lieutenant."
"But we told them." Calmly, the colonel looked back.
"I know what we said. There wasn't time."
Without even knowing what they were talking about, Allison could tell, for a colonel, he was a horrible liar. The lieutenant's face whitened.
"I'll contact Houston," the colonel said, dismissing the lieutenant.
The door clicked closed, leaving a silence filled by Colonel Doherty's well-groomed fingers drumming the tabletop. Allison's throat felt ready to close. "You're actually serious?" Her heart double-clutched. "Aliens really did make this pyramid?" Joel began hacking the Uranus weapons system using an emulator provided by the Pentagon within minutes of their call. He worked fast, with intense focus, trying hard to suppress his emotions. Nobody seemed surprised the Pentagon had lied. Joel should have anticipated it. Vince would have. Vince trusted nobody, especially the Pentagon. Maybe paranoia was healthier. The Pentagon didn't flinch when Joel asked for the emulator, only told him he was wasting his time, it couldn't be cracked. Especially not in the 47 minutes remaining until a launch window. Administrator Thomas stepped up then, saying firmly, "Just send the goddamn thing." Within 3 minutes, Joel had it running on his computer with a timer on screen counting down the launch window. It currently read 12 minutes, 32 seconds. He'd nearly finished running through all the source at the binary level, breaking out each individual component and isolating it from the rest. That's where vulnerabilities usually showed up, in the connections between the pieces. So far, though, he hadn't had any luck, and time was running out, fast, especially taking into account that once he hacked it, the patch file would take 2 to 3 minutes to uplink to Uranus depending on its size. 10 minutes, 32 seconds left. A security algorithm called RRR-SH52, apparently classified higher than top secret, had been implemented in the design. The Pentagon refused to give Joel any more information, but provided black box programming objects to use. Likely this hailed back to his last government work following 9/11, decoding enemy transmissions. They hadn't expected him to also decode friendly ones. He hadn't expected anything like what he'd discovered inside them. Vince would go batshit if he knew, but Joel's clearance guaranteed that he never would. With 8 minutes left, he had all 58 components and connectors documented. Quickly, he scanned over them again, still finding no obvious deficiencies. The next step was to bust through each piece, but that would take more time than he had. He probably only had time for one, if that. Panic threatened to well up inside him as he sat there trying to pick which component was the likeliest candidate for exploitation. His brain turned to oatmeal as the timer ticked down. He couldn't concentrate. People would die because of him. Christ, the moon would be nuked. He'd become one of them, the ones he and Vince loathed. Joel shook his head clear. He had to focus. 6 minutes, 30 seconds. His hands drummed his thighs. 58 components, all interconnected, each with a security layer using this ultra-top-secret RRR-SH52 accessible only through black box objects. 6 minutes, 10 seconds. He stopped drumming. Wait. Fingers dancing across the keyboard, Joel quickly dropped into the security objects and began studying their source. The encryption algorithm was far too complex to understand. His math background wasn't even close to adequate. But understanding the object's fail-safes were another thing entirely. "What happens when you think you're being hacked?" he asked the code, scrolling up his screen. At 4 minutes, 28 seconds, he found out. When he did, he almost laughed. Vince was right. The government was so stupid. To keep their secrets, some genius coder, probably sequestered underground for the rest of his life, decided if someone appeared to be close to cracking RRR-SH52, its best tactic was to completely obliterate itself. This stopped the hacker's progress, as the system would be crippled and no longer accessible. Or, in Uranus's case, the firing module would be unable to communicate with the launch module. Using the black box object code, reverse engineering a daemon to trick out the security layer was simple, resulting in a reasonably short piece of code. Because it had access to the weapons system, Joel would upload the code to be patched into Uranus's environment system. If it worked, it would execute a connection attempt to the weapons system's security layer, masquerading exactly as RRR-SH52 defines a hacker on the verge of breaking in. Unfortunately, Joel had no way of testing the code without crippling his computers down here. He reviewed the work 3 times, hoping to God he hadn't overlooked a stupid mistake. With Uranus 2 minutes and 40 seconds away from launch window, he told the administrator he had a crack. God, please let it work. Communication with Uranus had been re-established for nearly 10 minutes. Everyone on board had given up hope of saving the ground crew. 2 minutes, 10 seconds. The uplink to Uranus began across the chasm of space. Slowly. Too slowly. The colonel gave Allison a half-hour alone with the images to reinterpret them using knowledge unavailable to any other archaeologist. Nobody explained the rush, but she understood enough to know lives were on the line somewhere due to things being defined in acronyms. When he returned, the colonel brought her to a presentation room where she now stood before him and 3 other dressed officers explaining the theory she cobbled together. Remember, I've only had 30 minutes to digest this. Part of that, much of that, was spent telling myself I wasn't asleep, dreaming. The colonel rotated his finger. Please, just get to the point, Miss Chung. Right. She cleared her throat. Gentlemen, if what I've been told is true, my guess is that this pyramid on the moon, and indeed the original Great Pyramid here on Earth, are a museum and a library of history books describing the life and culture of an extraterrestrial race, long ago wiped out. The Egyptians copying the first pyramid happened to adopt a lot of their culture, but much of it they got wrong. If I'm right, what they and scholars took as sun-worshipping may actually be sun-fearing. What if it's not raw, but actually the very definition of what killed them? An event they predicted maybe hundreds of years in advance, but were helpless to stop. The colonel shifted in his seat.
What sort of event, Miss Chung?
A nearby star going supernova.
Hart stumbled out of the pyramid. His suit lamp went shortly after the vital monitor, and he had to negotiate in the dark, keeping one hand against the pyramid's interior wall. The relief of finding Lizzie and Sarah still alive was brief as they touched their helmets together to talk. All 3 radios were dead. So were they, according to their wrist displays. Hart locked eyes with Lizzie. "TAC 3's armed." Sarah shook her head, looking back and forth between them.
"No, we shot off 2 flares before Uranus went over. Dell saw them with probably 15 minutes until LOS. Lots of time for abort." Sarah was the youngest of Uranus's crew. She lacked the cynicism of experience the rest of them had. Part of Hart envied her. He could tell Lizzie had the same suspicions about the Tactical 3 abort he did, but neither said a word. Instead, he changed the subject.
"I know where the pyramid came from. Nanites. I saw one, about this big."
He spread his finger and thumb about an 1/8 inch.
"I bet they're everywhere, building pyramids on any world with the right resources."
Relieved to talk about something other than warheads, Lizzie asked, "But why the moon? Why now?"
"They needed the junk we left here to build it from. They're probably all over the galaxy, cataloging the worlds already done so they only visit once. They visited Earth 5 centuries ago. They're what's messing with our electronics, harvesting them most likely. We should start back to the LM in case they go for our life support."
He shared another silent comment with Lizzie. Did it really matter? Sarah felt this one. "Dale saw our flares. Earth'll be radioed for a TAC 3 abort."
Hart sighed, meeting her eyes. "There's no TAC 3 abort. No way. The Pentagon doesn't waste resources, especially on an unneeded extra potential failure point."
Dale had the exact same thought.
The 2 of them had discussed it before launch.
"But—"
she trailed off. They began their return to the LM. Every 100 yards or so, Sarah glanced back. A half-hour later, she stopped dead. Hart read her lips from 10 yards away. Shit. A bright pinprick topped the horizon, Uranus coming back around. It was over. Strangely, in the face of certain death, Hart's fear drained away. His pulse remained a solid 65 as they once again put their helmets together, standing in the shadow of a monument commemorating a once grand alien civilization that, despite all its greatness, could not stop the inevitability of nature. Now, Hart, Lizzie, and Sarah were helpless against the stupidity and paranoia of human nature. They closed their eyes and braced for impact. Quietly, he recited the Lord's Prayer. Uranus 1 main system log file. 2_launch/00:08 --uplink/completed: compro_bin.tar.gz 2_launch/00:06 --uplink/verified 2_launch/00:05 --uplink/uncompressed 2_launch/00:04 compro_bin/auto execute /patch :env_sys 2_launch/00:03 compro_bin/querying weap_sys
2_launch/00:02-RRR/SH-52/packet_analysis:_failure. 2_launch/00:01-RRR/SH-52/condition:_potential_failure. 2_launch/00:0-RRR/SH-52/self_modify:_code_delete. 2_launch/00:0-warhead_EMS/detect:_system_failure/status:_green. 2_launch/00:0-warhead_EMS/auto shutdown/status:_amber. Hart opened his eyes and turned slowly around. For a moment his brain grappled with what he saw. Overhead, Uranus was well within launching range. He'd been wrong about the abort sequence. The government hadn't lied. That this surprised him so much bothered him. He, Dale, even Sarah had just assumed they'd lied. Something about that felt very wrong. But that feeling quickly took second place to joy. They weren't going to die. The three astronauts embraced, jumping like children on a weird bed, buoyant and silly in the moon's low gravity. During their return to the LM, Hart worried the nanites may have begun disassembling parts of the craft. He kept the thought to himself, and it turned out to be unwarranted. All systems were online. The radio status light glowed emerald when he threw the switch. "Uranus, LM here. Copy?" Hart heard Michael smiling. "You've got no idea how much we missed you, LM." He brought Hart up to speed on everything they'd missed. His original guess hadn't been wrong, and not surprisingly, the Pentagon had lied. They owed their lives to that kid he'd sat beside in the boardroom, a hacker named Joel White. He was the hero. Nobody outside of this mission would ever know that. Hart was about to seal the outer doors when he remembered his final ground duty. Pulling the American flag from its clips, he passed through the airlock and climbed back down to the moon. Standing beside the LM, he lifted the flag, ready to plunge the pole into the gray ground. But he stopped. A mile away, the pyramid reached toward the heavens, a breathtaking monument built from space junk humans left on the lunar surface, including atoms consumed from the original flag of the United States of America planted by Neil Armstrong. The new structure stood as a museum and a message to the rest of the cosmos, the epitaph of an extinct civilization. "Don't forget about us. We were here." From the universe they had come, and the universe eventually called them back. They accepted their fate, yet found a way to leave their legacy imprinted behind them. From this accomplishment, Hart doubted theirs was a world built on fears, lies, and propaganda. Humankind had a long way to go. Right now, its biggest threat was itself. After today, he realized how close he was to losing faith in his own species. He had expected to be lied to. When did it get so bad? He couldn't pinpoint the exact time. It had crept in slowly, infecting like a virus, unnoticed until now. The moon didn't belong to man any more than the universe did. It wasn't theirs to reclaim. Man belonged to the universe, and one day they too would be called back. By then, Hart hoped they might accept their fate with the same grace as whoever sent out those nanites. He gave the flag one last look before tossing it to the ground and clambering back inside the LM. It lay there in the dust as he sealed the outer hatch. It all felt so hopeless. Except they were still alive. Today, that timid kid with the curly hair and glasses he'd sat beside 2 weeks ago in that NASA boardroom managed to break through the machine of control that, in almost every way, was completely out of control. Being alive was definitely a start. He radioed back to the orbital. "Uranus,
we're ready to go home.
For more stories from Michael Hiebert, be sure to check him out on Amazon and on Audible. And if you enjoy stories and would like to hear a new one each week, please subscribe. And check us out on Facebook at Pocket Pulp, where we look forward to talking with and about the writers further. If you're a writer and would like to have your story featured on Pocket Pulp, contact us at pocketpulpsubmission@gmail.com. My name is Eric Brian Moore, Eric with a C, Brian with a Y, and you can follow me on Twitter or check out my website, ericbrianmoore.com. Music by Bluemont Score and Eternal Producer from Pixabay. Thank you for joining us. I look forward to reading you another fantastic story next week.